Wellness Week series. We're going to have a Wellness Week series, guys, with conversations dedicated to the importance of mental health and wellness. Nearly 58 million Americans, did you hear that number, live with a mental illness. Research shows rates of anxiety and depression are increasing. We are joined now by a panel of leading experts, board-certified psychiatrist, that's Dr. Sue Varma, you've seen her here, is a clinical assistant and professor of psychiatry at NYU. Clinical psychologist Thema is the 2023 president of the American Psychological Association. Thank you very much. She's also the author of Homecoming, Overcoming Fear and Trauma to Reclaim Your Whole Authentic Self. And last but certainly not least, clinical psychologist, that's Lisa D'Amour, is also with us. If you've watched the show on a regular basis, hope you do. You've seen Lisa here many times. Her latest book, by the way, is The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, Raising Connected, Capable, and Compassionate Adolescents. It's true, Lisa, that can be done. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
Sue, I want to start with you about the numbers of mental health. I went for a walk yesterday in Central Park and saw a couple of people who were clearly having some kind of episode. One guy was just screaming, "I love you," then he went, "I hate you," then he went, I want to kill you. Clearly having an episode. So that was an extreme case, but there are so many people that are having mental health episodes that we know nothing about. Is this, in fact, a crisis that everybody says it is, an epidemic that everybody says?
Yes, Gail, and this existed even before the pandemic. I'd love to be able to say that.
We always blame the pandemic.
Yes, yes, and even though we're coming out of it and we have all sorts of uncertainties, whether it's economic, political, racial, climate change, it really does come down to the fact that our stressors are many, but our buffers are few. And our stressors are things that we feel like we don't have agency and control over. And when we lose agency, we strip ourselves of our dignity and mental health symptoms rise. We're also in a loneliness crisis. So in my mind, as mental health symptoms go up, it's not surprising that 50% or more of people are feeling lonely in America.
Dr. Murthy just called it the other day an epidemic in
Absolutely,
this country, loneliness.
yes. And loneliness, as the Surgeon General's advisory said, increases our rates of depression, doubles it. So we're looking at the fact that we have less social civic engagement, less of these sort of soft tissue connections, if you will, and more of the uncertainty and less agency.
Another big problem, Dr. Bryant, is trauma. People are experiencing trauma. What's your advice on how to get through that, what to do with that?
Yes, it's so important to know that we are more than what has been done to us. And so we really encourage people to shift from shame and self-blame to self-compassion. And our science really promotes the use of both self-care and community care. So that self-care is taking care of our bodies, taking care of our mental health through therapy, and also exercising our boundaries and knowing that we can be intentional about who we connect with, but knowing we also don't heal alone. So
it's hard not to blame yourself.
It really is, because we get messages from society that are victim blaming. And so really empowering people to resist that, but also equipping us to be supportive when other people share their experiences of trauma, for us to respond with support instead of shame.
Lisa, when we talk about stressors and also the lack of buffers, I think of social media, particularly when it comes to kids. What's the effect of social media, do we know at this point, on young people?
Well, social media on its own is neither good nor bad, but there's certainly what we can call problematic use. So if it's excessive, or if it gets in the way of things that are necessary for healthy development, or if kids are in toxic online environments. And actually, Dr. Bryan's APA just put out an extraordinary advisory, incredibly useful for families, about what healthy social media use looks like. And it really does get at the fact that social media should not keep kids from sleeping, keep kids from being physically active, keep kids from having one-on-one interpersonal interactions with other people. And we also just want to be careful that they're not in toxic environments that promote self-harm or eating disorder behavior or hate or anything else that we know is bad for kids.
You know, Sue, speaking of self-harm, we've seen suicide rates going up in this country. There have been a lot of high-profile suicides recently. And my question is, when you think about children and you look at their lives, is it possible to early on see signs that may point to future mental health issues down the line? And if so, what can parents do to address them so it doesn't get to that point?
Yes. So we look at something called adverse childhood events, and we're having more understanding of sort of what we call the social determinants of mental illness, and looking at the environments, whether it's anything from incarceration, domestic violence, untreated mental illness, substance abuse in the family, history of trauma, intergenerational trauma. All of this predisposes children to stress, and specifically we look at the telomeres, when it comes to chromosomes, these are signs, markers of aging. And we see that the pandemic, for example, and the social isolation that children were experiencing also promoted accelerated aging in the brain and in the body. So being able to get help now that we have screenings for anxiety and depression that are now becoming commonplace in the pediatrics office, pediatrician's office, integrating mental health into the fold of primary care so that it is routine that you ask these basic questions. We talked about social media use, substance abuse, self-harm. We also see that teen dating violence puts us at risk, young girls at risk for self-harm later on. So being able to catch these things early and promoting healthy behavior, adults have to model that in relationships, setting boundaries, what is toxic, what are we willing to accept, and also being able to say no and empowering our children to say no to things that make them feel uncomfortable.
Dr. Bryant, let's talk about people of color seeking help. I keep hearing that, people of color don't seek help in the numbers that others do. Is it because we don't want to or because it's not available?
It is really both. So there's the reality of stigma around seeking mental health.
Still a stigma.
There is still a stigma, but I will say that has decreased, that more people of color are seeking services. But the other reality is we are underrepresented in the field. So if people feel more comfortable talking to someone of their same culture, it's harder to find that person, and then lack of access to mental health services. So the American Psychological Association has both been working to advocate for equity in terms of access to quality mental health services, but also looking to diversify the field. So we've been dedicating funds to really looking at how do we eradicate racism, not only in society, but within the field, so that when you see someone, they can be attuned to your culture and recognize that injustice and oppression are sources of stress.
You also guys have to get the right therapist. I went to a therapist once and I'm pouring my heart out and I hear,
Oh.
do you know how debilitating that
Yes,
is? I mean, so I know, that's what I thought too, but I
Right.
gathered my things and just sort of crept out of the door. This
It
was years
creates
ago.
ruptures,
It
and
does.
when people see someone who is not attentive or not attuned, you can believe that that's what therapy is. So we really try to encourage people to shop around.
Yeah, don't be turned off if you
Yes.
have a bad experience, is
Yes.
my
Yeah.
point.
Yes.
Well, as therapists often say, our time today is done. That's our session. Thank you both.
I've heard
Thank
that
you all very much.
But it's free. this one is
Our
free.
time is up.
free.
Our time is up.
Sue Barma, we thank you. Thema Bryant, good to see you. And Lisa DeMore, always good to see you.